my words in memory of my father remain an unfinished work. And they might always be that way. So the stone says in Hebrew, it says, Po Nikbar Yisrael Tuvia ben Eliezer. Here lies Yisrael Tuvia, son of Eliezer, and I'm going to explain my father's Hebrew name. Niftar Yudbet Nisan Tafshin Pei. He passed away on the 12th of the Hebrew month of Nisan in the year 5780 on the Hebrew calendar. Beloved husband, father, and grandfather, Russell T. Mollot, March 14th, 1948 to April 6th, 2020. And the bottom inscription, the 5 Hebrew letters at the bottom, Taf Nun Sadi Bet Hey, is an abbreviation for the Hebrew words Tehei Nishmaso Tzirura B'Tzror HaChayim, which means may his soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. And that is our bid to the deceased to be forever held by God with him in eternity in heaven. So my father, the name on the stone is Yisrael Tuvia, which might confuse some people, because for a large part of his life, my father told people that his Hebrew name was Eliezer. And you'll see on the stone that that's the name of his father. Now, ironically, if you would go over to my grandfather's stone and look what his name is, it also doesn't say Eliezer. It says Laser. It says Laser. But I'm going to tell you a story, Sabina. I don't remember if you were there or not, but when I was becoming bar mitzvah, my father and I became very involved at the shul, the synagogue on Brighton 11th Street, where I had my bar mitzvah, and we became very close with Rabbi Rimler, who was and perhaps still is the rabbi of the shul. So this is already going back almost 30 years, I guess, when we were at the Shabbos table of Rabbi Rimler, so he was asking us our Hebrew names. So, I was, Rafael Lev ben Eliezer, because that's what we said my father's name was. And so he says to my father, Eliezer ben what? What's your father's name? Eliezer, son of, and he says, Laser. So Rabbi Rimler says, you can't be Eliezer ben Laser. And he says, why can't I be Eliezer ben Laser? He says, because Laser is just a nickname for Eliezer. Laser is just a nickname for Eliezer. You can't be named the same name as your father. And he goes, well, my parents didn't give me a Hebrew name. My Reform rabbi gave me a Hebrew name, and he never asked. So he's like, no, we have to change your name right now. So on this spot, he says, what's your English name? He says, Russell Talbot. Russell Talbot. Okay, Yisrael Tuvia. And he took, some phonetically similar sounding Hebrew names. He says, from now on, you're Yisrael Tuvia. And as it turns out, in Jewish law, a person's Hebrew name in Jewish law is the name that he is called. So if we call you Yisrael Tuvia for 30 days, that's your new Hebrew name. So that became his name. And so when I made the stone, I consulted with rabbis, and I was told this is the name I should use. And for the father's name, I should write Eliezer and not Laser, like it is on my grandfather's stone. It should be Eliezer, which is his proper Hebrew name. So I wanted to tell that story, and now I want to say what I feel is so significant about that is that this very much speaks to, I think, who my father was. If I can put my rabbi hat on and also my son hat on, and say that there's two verses that speak about the significance of a person's name, and one of them is a verse in Proverbs, which says as follows. It says, a good name is preferable to great wealth, and good grace is preferred over silver and gold. People in this world, they value wealth. They value materialism. They value having a lot of stuff. And my dad was not that person. My dad would always say, a dollar saved is better than a dollar earned. Some people say a dollar saved is a dollar earned. But my father would say $1 saved is better than $1 earned, because they can't tax you on what you save. They can only tax you on what you earn. So $1 earned is really worth less than $1, but $1 saved is a real dollar. So my father is not a guy who was blessed with great material wealth, or who was obsessed with material wealth. But what really characterized my father, and I think we can all agree, is what this verse praises, and that is a good name and good grace. A good name is preferable to great wealth, and good grace is preferred over silver and gold. And that's who my father was. The second verse is in Ecclesiastes, and it says as follows. It says, a good name is better than fragrant oil. A fragrant oil in the terms of the Bible means what we would call today perfume. They had fragrant oils. A good name is better than fragrant oil. Why does the verse compare a good name to oil as opposed to any other substance? Why isn't it a good name is better than honey? A good name is better than wine. These are all precious, coveted, enjoyable substances. Why oil? And so they say because when you mix oil with water, oil rises to the top. If you mix any of the other substances with water, it just dissolves into the water and it gets lost. So oil is something that has a special quality of rising to the top. And that's the idea of having a good name. Having a good name, and we'll talk about what it means, a good name, is the very finest quality. And I think on a simple level, it means to have a beautiful and decent and upright character, to be someone that people are glad to know you, to be someone that when your name comes up, everybody says, what a wonderful person. And I said this at the burial as well, that in the time following my father's passing until we were able to bury him, all I could hear from people was just how wonderful he was, and how the very best person had been taken from us. And like my sister said, I was going to say the same thing. People I didn't know from around the country, my father's name starts lighting up on Facebook because it's getting tagged by the chess club in Oklahoma and the chess club in who knows where, because all these people, they had a relationship with him from nowhere. He promoted chess and chess clubs with his business, and it could have been just a very business-like relationship, but in his relations with other people, he was so delightful that everybody loved him. He was a person that brought joy to everyone who knew him. And he was a fellow with a very, very deep sense of humor. He brought laughter to a lot of people all the time. He was always trying to be jovial and make light and get people to laugh. And, his sense of humor rubbed off on me, and, makes me a little obnoxious sometimes. But, people tell me I'm very funny, but I say, I'm just pulling all the gags my dad used to pull. Just a person who loved to make people smile. And what our rabbis are teaching us is that the reason a good name is compared to oil, because this is a quality that rises above all else, is to be pleasant and make other people happy in such a way that you become a beloved and celebrated person. Then the rabbis asked, why is oil contrasted with a good name? Because it says a good name is better than oil. So while there's a comparison, there's also a contrast. So what is the contrast? And the rabbis write these beautiful words that I want to share, because I think it really can give us some encouragement and some warmth in remembering my father, and in knowing, like my sister said, that he's in a good place. Because they say as follows. They said, good oil, fragrant oil, perfume, it lasts a short time, but a good name lasts forever. Fragrant oil, it runs out eventually. The bottle runs dry. But a good name never runs dry. Fragrant oil is something that is possessed only by the wealthy. But a good name is something that can be possessed by any individual. A fragrant oil is something that's possessed only by the living. But a good name is possessed by those who are alive and even those after they have passed. A fragrant oil can cause a pleasant aroma. Its pleasantness and the enjoyment that it brings, this fragrant oil, will not go past the room in which the bottle is opened. But a good name goes beyond and beyond and spreads all over the world, as we were witness to when we saw all the people who expressed their love for my father from near and far when they heard about his passing. As I mentioned, my father's name changed sort of in the middle of his life. My father's name changed. And I think this is very emblematic of another idea that our rabbis teach us, which is, they say that there are three names that a person has. If you thought you had one name, it turns out you're wrong, because you have three. A person has the name that his parents give him. A person has the name that others call him. And a person has the name that he makes for himself. And it's a very deep statement, and it doesn't mean just like your name tag. Larry, your parents called you Larry, your friends call you Curly, and you call yourself Mo. It's not what it means. It means there's a name that your parents give you, but there's also the impression that you make upon others, and there's the legacy that you leave behind forever. And I think in a certain symbolic way, by my father changing his name, was very indicative of the fact that he was a person who made a name for himself. He was a person who was of such a fine character and who went through such an evolution in his life in so many ways, from the place that he began to where he ultimately ended up, that he is a person who truly made a name for himself. And I think that God almost put his stamp on it when he changed his name to Yisrael Tovia, showing that he had truly built a name for himself. I want to touch on another point that my sister mentioned about my father's shyness. And while some people could look at that as a character flaw, and there's definitely comes with its share of weaknesses, but I want to talk about how that innate characteristic was one of my father's greatest strengths. Because one of the teachings of Judaism, which is very, very highlighted in our tradition, is a verse in the book of Micah, which says as follows. It says, God has told you, O man, what is good and what God seeks from you. You ready? You hear this? Now, the Torah is very big. The Torah is a very big book. There's 613 commandments. But I could show you in the Talmud where it says that the prophet Micah took all 613 and he held them up on three pillars. So if you do these three things, you've upheld the entire Torah. And what are those three things? It is doing justice, loving kindness, and walking humbly with your God. And those are three characteristics that I think are very, very emblematic of my father. He was a person who was very passionate about justice. He was very passionate about things which he felt were wrong, that he would speak out against. And even though, like my sister said, not everybody agreed with him, and it could get him into some arguments with people, but he wasn't afraid. He didn't hold his tongue. He spoke out when he felt that there was a wrong that was being committed. He would speak up. He would do something about it. He was an activist. We know my father was an activist. He pursued justice. That's pillar number one. Loving kindness. What more can be said? That was who my father was, and we said so much about it, and his generosity beyond his means. And walking humbly with God is the final piece. What a humble individual. The person who's most praised in the entire Torah, if there's one person who's held up in the Torah as the most holy human being who ever lived, who would you say it is? The holiest person who ever lived in Judaism was Moses. And Moses is called by the Torah the humblest among all men. So the Torah equates humility with holiness. And that was a trait that my father personified in an extreme way, was his sense of humility, of his sense of modesty. And that was one of the qualities that made him very great. I want to end with a story. On March 1st, teachers like myself were allowed to get the COVID vaccine in Washington State, but it was very, very difficult to get an appointment. And I tried over and over, day after day, to get an appointment, and there was just no appointments to be found in a 30-mile radius. It was just impossible. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I want to get a vaccine, but there's just so little supply and too much demand. So finally, someone emailed me and said, I have a person who's able to facilitate making appointments for people. If you send them your information, they'll help you get an appointment. So I said, fine. So I sent my information to this individual, and I got a text message a few days later, and it said, here's a link where you can sign up to an appointment. So this was Sunday, March 7th. So I click the link, I make an appointment, I get an appointment for Tuesday, March 9th, okay? So between Sunday and Tuesday, I start thinking, I'm gonna get a vaccine. Which vaccine am I gonna get? There's 3 different vaccines. There's the Moderna vaccine, which you have to wait 28 days between doses. There's the Pfizer vaccine, which is 21 days. There's the Johnson vaccine, which is 1 shot. Which one am I going to get? Because you never know till you get there which one they're going to give you. It just depends on supply. So this is what I'm thinking about. It would be so convenient to get the 1-shot vaccine. I don't have to wait, and then the 21 days is probably better than 28 days, but I guess I'll find out when I get there. Long story short, Tuesday comes, I come to my appointment. I sit down in a pharmacy where the appointment took place. And the pharmacist goes ahead and shoots me in the arm. And she says, okay, your next shot, your next dose is going to be in 4 weeks. So I knew right away, okay, that's the 28 days. That's the Moderna, right? Okay. So she's looking at the calendar. I said, what's the date? She looks up, she says April 6th. So she said April 6th. Now look at the stone on this grave here. And you see April 6th is the day my father passed away. And so that date is a very significant date in my mind. So all of a sudden my brain starts exploding. I'm like, April 6th is when I get the next dose? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, I feel like this is like too incredible to be a coincidence, because of all the days to get an appointment, which was very difficult to get, and of all the different choices of vaccines and how many days it would be for it to come out on that day. It comes out that with all those variables juggling in the air, all those balls landed that I should get the final dose of my COVID vaccine to immunize me from this terrible sickness that my sister spoke about, on the very day that my father gave up his soul from that very same disease. And I was thinking to myself, this is just too strange to be a coincidence. And like my sister said, she kind of felt she could hear Dad's voice talking to her. At that moment, I also felt like Dad was reaching out to me, and he was saying to me, you know what happened to me, but I'm not going to let it happen to you. And I want you to know that I'm advocating for you up here, and I had something to do with this arrangement. So in a certain way, I felt like this was Dad's message to me from beyond, that he's in a good place. Like my sister said, he's watching us from his place, and he is advocating for us to the one above, that this world should treat us well. As generous a person and as kind a person as Dad was in his life, you have to know that he continues to be that even now, and that connection remains. And so on that note, I want to direct us now to the ritual which is customary at this time of putting a stone on the grave, which I see some of you have already done. And I want to just emphasize the significance of it and how it relates to what I've said. And then we'll close the ceremony. The word for stone in Hebrew is even. And what's interesting about the word even in Hebrew is that it appears to be a combination of two words, which is av, which means father, and ben, which means son or child. Why is it that a stone is sort of a compound word of father and son, parent and child? And the plain meaning that they say is because a stone is a building block. A stone is what you use to build something. And when a parent creates a child, when parents build a family, that's true building. So the stone, the building block, is a combination of this relationship, father and son, parent to child. That is true building. And a person, after they're gone, they can do no more building in this world. And so what we do is that we go to their stone, what remains of them in this world, and we take a smaller stone, an additional stone, and we build on it. And when we do that, we're making a commitment. And that is, I will make sure that your legacy lives on. What you have built. In other words, a child doesn't have to only be a biological child. In fact, the Torah tells us about Noah. You heard of Noah and Noah's Ark. It's very famous. So if you read about Noah in the Torah, this is what it says. It says, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, which is a very odd verse because you should expect it to say, these are the generations of Noah. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth, right? Which comes a little bit later, but it interrupts that with, here are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. Why insert that over here? So our rabbis teach us that if a person is righteous, his righteousness is his offspring. The good deeds and the goodness that he puts out into the world, that he produces in the world, is also offspring. It might not be physical offspring, a biological offspring, but it is certainly a byproduct of them, and that's valued by God as though they put into the world. So the stone, when we add to the stone by building on it with another stone, we're saying your legacy should continue to be built in the world, and I'm going to be a building block in that construction, in that foundation. So we've spoken today about the legacy of my father, who he was, and as his family, as his loved ones, we very much want to see his memory live on and his legacy live on. So we're going to set a small stone upon his grave, having in mind these thoughts that we love him, we miss him, we remember him, and we will make sure that his memory lives on and that his legacy lives on through us living the lessons that we learned from him.